Hello and welcome back to another video. In fact, one of the last videos for this class, and we are going to talk about the final assignment, which is about cognitive interviews. So as a reminder, we are actually not going to send the survey out and gather information in this class. The goal for this class is to leave the class with a solid survey. In this lesson, we are going to talk about cognitive interviews, which is a really powerful tool to ensure that the survey we're using can be used to collect the data we need to collect. And so if that doesn't make sense yet, hopefully by the end of the video, it will make sense. But I want to clarify that what we're talking about today is very different than administering the survey for data collection. So with that, let's go ahead and hop into the details of this video. So first, let's think about the definition of a cognitive interview. So I have it typed out on here. It's also in the Willis reading. So it says a cognitive interview is intended to evaluate and to improve self-report survey questions, measurement instruments, research consent forms, and other written materials. So another way to think about it as a structured interaction between you, the interviewer, and a respondent. During this structured interview, you are going to ask both structured questions that you would come up with ahead of time, as well as likely some impromptu questions. We're going to talk about two different methods that you may employ during your cognitive interview. One of them being a probing strategy, and one of them being a think aloud strategy. The goal of a cognitive interview is to determine how an item is functioning and to see where you might need to refine, remove, or improve different items in your survey to make sure that you're asking questions, both the right question and the right way to ask a question to get the information you need from your respondents when it is time to send the survey out for data collection. So keep that in mind, that is one of the main goals of a cognitive interview. Sometimes it's helpful to think of this in terms of what a cognitive interview is and what a cognitive interview is not. So let's head back to that Willis document and look at a chart that they have that I think is really helpful. And we'll just look at a few points on that chart. So let's head over there now. So this is page 5 of the Willis reading. On this table, they're comparing a cognitive interview and the field survey questionnaire, which is when they're saying when you're going to go ahead and administer it. So look at the difference in the purpose. So when we're administering the survey, our purpose is to collect the data that we're going to statistically analyze. But a cognitive interview, we're gathering information about the functioning of the survey. And that's what I was saying earlier. It's about the item functioning. What we're doing is we're asking, is this question asking the thing that I'm intending it to ask? And if not, why not? Why is one person answering yes and somebody else answering no? Not because it's the answer to their survey question, but because they might be confused on what I'm actually asking. And in this article, they will go into more specific details with that if it doesn't make sense yet. So we're thinking about sample size. So when we administer our survey, we need a large enough sample size that it has some sort of statistical power. Whereas in a cognitive interview, we might do multiple rounds of a cognitive interview of 3 to 5 people. He's saying no more than 10, where we're just getting information about how the survey is functioning. He's also going to go into recruitment, interviewers, the type of people we're getting, the materials and how they're presented, the methods, and the analysis. So the one thing I'm going to point out with the analysis is that when we administer our survey, we're looking at a quantitative statistical analysis. But notice that when we are doing a cognitive interview, we're looking at a qualitative analysis. So there is going to be more about analysis for cognitive interviews, and we are so fortunate to have 2 librarians who will post a video for us to watch, and they will be at the live session. So I'm actually not going to go into that. I am going to defer to the experts, but that was the one thing that I just wanted to point out. So spend some time. This is on pages 5 and 6 of the Willis paper. Spend some extra time on this if you need to. Now that we've spent a little bit of time thinking about what a cognitive interview is and what a cognitive interview is not, let's go ahead and look at some slides to think about how we're going to conduct this interview. And it is a bit of an intensive process, and hopefully I will give you some tools and strategies that can set you up for success. So let's go ahead and look at those. So in this section, we're going to think about 3 things, but really just 2, because like I said before, we're going to leave some tips and tricks on how to analyze to the experts. So for this part, we're going to think about how we will plan our cognitive interviews and how we will administer those. So let's go ahead and start with the plan. And you will see that one of your assignments is to develop a cognitive interview protocol. So we're going to go ahead and look at 2 different documents that will talk a little bit more about that. Now, this is a cognitive interview protocol that I found when I was going through the class the first time. And I found it really helpful. I'm going to link it below, but they have a really comprehensive definition of what a cognitive interview is. They're going to talk about why you would use it. And then we come down here, they're going to talk about how preparing how to conduct it, which I'm going to show you an example of that as well. And then they provide some instructions for conducting the cognitive interview. So I found this really helpful as just kind of like one more resource to look at. You might find it helpful also. Like I said, I'll link it below if it's something that you think will help you. But we'll also go ahead and look at the example that I made. So let's hop over to that screen. Do make sure that you check the instructions and the directions in Canvas just in case they're slightly different. But here's just an example of one that I made that helped me when I was doing round 1 of cognitive interviews. And interestingly, in the next few weeks, I will be doing a second round. But first, I just thought about preparing for the interview. So I thought about who I need to email. I thought about making the Calendly invites. You can do these in person or on Zoom. For me, I found it much easier to conduct the interview on Zoom because we could share the screen. I kind of controlled the pace of it because we could only look at one question at a time, whatever I was projecting. And also it was really easy to record. So that was helpful for me, but you do what works for you. So I made a spreadsheet, which I will show you an example of that in just a minute, if that's something that you'll find helpful. Then I love anything I can do to check off. So it was like, if I contacted them, I got to check that off. And then scheduling them, I emailed some reminders. And then the last one was to do a practice, which I don't think I actually ended up doing, but it probably would have been a good idea to do. So then I had some instructions for conducting the interview. I have some things to do before the interview, the day of the interview. And again, we're all just like busy or stressed or we just have a lot going on. So I feel like if you can sit down and come up with a plan ahead of time and just help yourself out as much as possible. So that way the day of it, you just pull this out and think, oh yeah, okay, these are the last minute things I need. So always be your best friend, always help yourself. Then some reminders of what to do before the cognitive interview. Introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the project you're working on, and then always, if you record, always make sure that you ask their permission to record. And then I did develop a little bit of a script. I typed it out ahead of time just to help me think about all the things I wanted to say. But when it came to the actual day, I really just communicated the essence of what I wrote in this. Then they recommend that you do a warm-up for the probing and the think aloud process. So one thing that we talk about a little bit is that there's 2 types of questioning that you can do during a cognitive interview. And a lot of times you're going to end up using both. So there's the probing questions, and those probing questions you can have pre-planned or you can do them on the spot. So probing questions might be like some of the questions that we're going to look at in just a minute that I had pre-planned. They can also be questions like, can you explain further? Or why did you say that? Or what made you think of that? So if a respondent answers in a way that is unexpected to you, you can push into that and ask several follow-up questions. And so that's why this is a semi-structured interview, because you're going to go in with a plan and questions that you want to ask, but you're also going to keep it fluid and open and be ready to almost in a way follow your respondent's lead. The other type of questioning that you can utilize in the cognitive interview is what's called a think aloud. So I did make a video on cognitive interviews last year, and this one has some of the same things, but some things are different. And in that video, I talk a lot more about this. If you want to see that a little bit more, you can look at the other video. But there is a kind of a standard recommendation about this Windows example. For me, that example doesn't really work, but what does work for me is recommending some kind of think aloud strategy that you would implement if you were reading a book with a child. So as you're reading to a young child, especially somebody who is not able to read on their own yet, you would likely pause throughout the book and talk about things that you're thinking about. You're going to pause and look at the picture, and you're going to say, oh, look at this little person over here peeking through the window. Our character doesn't even know they're over there. I wonder what's going to happen next. Or you might notice that something gets bigger on every page. And so you might point that out and ask out loud, you wonder what's going to happen or why the author did that. So you're going to take all the things that you think about as a good, strong reader, and you're going to say them out loud because you're modeling for the non-reader what a good reader does in their own mind that can't be seen. And so you're modeling that so that the non-reader, they can implement when it's their turn to read on their own. So kind of that concept of the thinking aloud, we can't just go into somebody's brain and see what they're thinking. We need them to express those words out loud so we know what they're thinking. So in a cognitive interview, that's what we're asking our respondents to do. We're asking them to tell us out loud the things that they're thinking about as they're answering the questions, because if they don't, then we don't know what they're actually thinking or why they're thinking that, or maybe where some sort of miscommunication or misunderstanding is, because again, our goal is item functioning. And so if they're interpreting it one way, and it's not the way we intended it to be interpreted, the only way we can know that is if they're thinking those thoughts aloud. So those are the two types of strategies that you will often use in a cognitive interview: probing and think alouds. So let's go ahead and look back at our cognitive interview protocol, and we'll take a look at some of the questions that I had pre-planned going into my cognitive interviews. And remember that this is both structured and unstructured. It's a semi-structured cognitive interview. So I did have some questions already posed, written out ahead of time, ready to go. Things like these two. What thoughts do you have about this question? Is there anything that you would add or change? I have some others. So what do you think I'm asking in this question? Right? So that's really helpful to get that information. Where does your respondent think you're going with this? What are the thoughts that come to mind as you look over this set of prompts? Please tell me out loud any thoughts that you have while looking at this set of items. Is there anything missing? Is there anything confusing? So those were some items that I came up with ahead of time. But then as we were talking, because it was a bit of a conversation, I did come up with questions on the spot that seemed fluid and right in that moment that kind of fit the conversation that we were having. And in a semi-structured interview, you can definitely do that. So now let's head over to the Excel sheet that I made that you can use if you think it would be helpful for you as well. This is the Excel sheet that I have, and it's just blank so you can just see the template. But I just had the name of the people that I was going to contact. So this was everybody on my contact list. Then for me, it was important to know which position that they held. So I had that. Then their email address. And then again, I love a good checkoff list. So once I emailed them, I gave myself a check. Then were they able to interview? I would say yes or no. If it was a yes, then I put the date of the interview. And then if I completed the interview, I gave myself another check mark and then notes. So that is just a template that if that seems helpful to you, please go ahead and use that. Let's go ahead and head back to the PowerPoint. All right, let's go ahead and look at the last couple slides for this lesson. So here's a few final reminders as we close out this semester, which is so hard to believe that we are already here. But your last assignment for Module 8 has two parts to it. So the first part is the updated survey draft. And in just a minute, we're going to go over an example of a draft that somebody submitted in a previous semester. Then part 2 is a reflection. I'm going to go over both of these, but please do remember to check Canvas because I'm not going to go over every single detail and I don't want you to miss something important. So let's go ahead and head over to an example of the updated survey draft that is going to contain many of the elements that you'll need to have in your final assignment. So let's go ahead and head over there now. So here is just an example that Dr. Meriker wanted me to show you that your final assignment might look like. So again, make sure you read Canvas. So do make sure that your research question or questions are at the top of your survey draft. But we're going to scroll down here because this is what we want to see. So this person used the track changes, which meant that they were able to begin with their original version. And that's what Dr. Meriker wants. She wants you to have the original version and to do the track changes so that she's able to see both. She's able to see how your survey started and to see the things that you did to update or change your survey. So that's what this is mostly going to model. So we'll go ahead and just look at a couple of things. So for item 1, it says, how do you currently describe your gender identity? And then notice that they added choose all that apply. So we have that there. And then what is your age in years? It looks like originally they had please specify, and then they crossed that off and changed it to I prefer not to answer. So we'll just, again, look at a couple more just to kind of show that this has both the original survey and then they just use that track changes. And that is a function in Word that is literally like a click of a button. So it says item 3, and then it was likely which categories describe you. And they changed it to which of the following racial and ethnic categories describe you. Select all that apply. And then the first was American Indian or Alaska Native. And then they had a list that they ended up taking out. So hopefully this is kind of just demonstrating a strong example of what it looks like to have your original survey with the track changes so that we can see both. And then as I mentioned before, this person added comments on the side. And so sometimes they used those comments to justify edits that they made. Other times they made the comments to justify edits that they chose not to make. A couple other times they just added some contextual information for themselves that was not necessarily pertinent to the assignment, but again, this is supposed to be a high utility assignment. And so ideally it's something that you're going to be able to implement at some point in the future for your own needs. And so those notes are just there to help when it is time to implement. The second part of your assignment is to complete some sort of reflection. You're just going to reflect on different things that you learned, how you might have changed as a survey researcher, and things that you'll want to keep in mind as you move forward in your career. So that's the part 2 of your final assignment. And then we have our last live session. And as a reminder, everyone is required to meet with Dr. Meriker at least one time throughout the semester, and these live sessions count as that. So if you have not yet met with her, do either reach out to meet with her or make sure that you attend the live session. So it's Wednesday, April 30th from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the 2 individuals that I mentioned earlier who are going to talk through how to analyze the information that we get from cognitive interviews, they are actually going to be at that live session and they will be able to answer questions live, which will be amazing. So even if you have met the requirement, it is definitely a session that you will not want to miss. And that's it for this video. Thank you for joining me. Hopefully you learned a lot about cognitive interviews and have some good tools in your toolbox of how to conduct your own cognitive interview and how to complete the assignments for this module, and that you just feel confident going forward both in this class and when it's time to conduct your own interviews in the future. So thank you again, and hopefully I will see you at the live session next week. Talk to you soon. Bye.